Okay, so we are actually going to get started on what we're going to really talk about today. We're going to start off with kind of a PowerPoint, but that's not what we're really going to do. This is just going to be to show you guys some proof, because I am going to guess that for the majority of us, this is going to be very difficult for you to wrap your mind around. Your mind's going to go the exact same place when I started trying to figure this out that my mind went, which is not true, that's a lie, all of history supports me, that can't be true, possibly. And then your mind's going to go to other avenues that seem very reasonable. But if you stick with me, I think I will be able to firmly persuade you that it's cause faith, pistis, that God actually meant this. And it's not a point of salvation, but it is a point of freedom for us. If we can understand it, we can actually grow more and understand what Jesus is looking for us in our lives. So we will start off with a little bit of PowerPoint. This is going to be a bit redundant, so we're going to fly through it, believe it or not. Come on, why aren't you up there? Not using the Apple today. Okay, so can y'all see that? I know it's kind of, these lights are, you may notice, are about the worst lighting system right now. At least if you're David Stewart from Arizona. Okay, so anyone recognize that word?
I use it all the time.
We're SIPE, yes. So what you're looking at is, and this is just part of etymology of what we call worship. Yeah, so that's one of the older words that you would have seen. Now there's a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance, and I have experienced it. In fact, if you are studying with anyone who has been taught faith only, and you mention baptism, you know what's happening to them at that second that you point out, maybe 1 Peter 3:21 or something like that? It's called cognitive dissonance. In psychology, that's the mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who either holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values at the same time, or is confronted by new information that conflicts with existing beliefs, ideas, or values. Have you ever felt that? Some cognitive dissonance? You know, it's where stuff's not harmonizing with you. We're saying, oh my goodness, this is kind of correct. I never thought of it that way. But everything in history in my life tells me that's not correct. How can I reconcile an entire past life, be it 18 years you're studying with someone young, or someone who's 65 who says that can't possibly be? Look at all of history.
It's really hard to admit that you believed a lie for 10, 20 years.
Well, yes, believed a lie, or just that you were slightly off, or that you used a wrong term that led to some confusion. Because it's not always just a lie. Most of this, in fact, a lot of times, you know, people their intention may be good. You know, the saying about good intentions and where they can lead. But the lack of knowledge, I mean, it can destroy you. So, what we're going to look at today is a word history here. First off, we're going to look at the self-existence of God. In Acts 17:24-25, he says, "The God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things." Any thoughts on that?
He does ask us to serve.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, how does he ask you to serve?
By following the gospel and the teachings of his Son.
It's kind of one. What would you say, what part of your life, though, is dedicated to service?
Should be all of it.
All of it, yeah. Romans 12 would say that, huh? A living and holy sacrifice, which is your rational service. Okay, so, yeah, the self-existence of God, though. So, he does not need these things from us. We do not make him more perfect. We love him because he first loved us. Now, this is kind of interesting. There was a prophecy in Isaiah 66:23, and this is going to kind of blow your mind, so just stay with me for a second. And it says, this is of the new dispensation, which scholars from Burton Kaufman to name X, Y, or Z, they all agree this is what it was talking about. But it was very hard for them to understand, and it's very hard for us to understand today. And of course, if you had been a Jew, it would have been basically impossible for you to get this. It says, "And it shall be from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh will worship me, says the Lord." And by the all flesh, he was talking about taking people from different places, instead of just being the Jews and the Gentiles. How long is Sabbath to Sabbath? Because this is impossible, if you look at that.
On 8.
You will starve to death if you were doing that.
Week to week. It's every week.
Every week, yep.
24/7.
24/7. But you would starve to death, period, if you tried to do that. You couldn't do it. Unless you got the Lord's Supper loaded with extra calories or something. So, what we're going to look at here is John 4, 19 and 24. The New Testament represented a very radical shift from the Old Testament. And that's why the Jews rejected it to a large degree. It meant a lot that just rejected it. Because it was so new, it was so different, what they experienced was cognitive dissonance. This can't be. Now, in John 4, and we're just going to go through this briefly, because what we're actually going to look at is our modern word coming up here. But in John 4, we're going to see that this modern word really fits in. It says 19 to 24, and I've redacted small parts just in regard to time. The woman said to him, this Samaritan woman, "Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. But an hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people the Father seeks to be His worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth." We can throw that around a lot of ways, because it's poorly defined. Spirit and truth. I can make you believe that's exactly 5 acts. I can make you believe that it's 6. I can tell you that it's 4. But what does it really mean? What we need to look at here is the dichotomy that Jesus threw out there. When this lady says, she goes, "Location, location, which is it? The temple or the mountain?" He didn't answer her with that. He said the location is...
There's no locale.
There is no locale. Exactly. Well, there is a location, in fact. If you see there, it's in your spirit. It's in spirit. Now, there are 2 ways you can even view that. In spirit, in your spirit, or in the Holy Spirit. Depends on what you're coming from, right? Some people capitalize that because it's just pneuma. It doesn't specify whether or not it's the spirit of man or the spirit of God. But if you look at it as being the Holy Spirit, and if you believe Acts 2:38 applies to the people he's talking to onward, to us as well, the gift of the Holy Spirit, then you could say, when am I not in the Spirit? And suddenly that would start matching with Isaiah 66.
If you go with that, the spirit and truth, that ties those 2 things together.
Oh, absolutely, because you can't have one without the other.
Unless it's your own spirit, what you feel. Because you get a lot of people that they follow what their feelings and emotions are rather than what...
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, what we're going to look at here is what our modern word means. Because, I'm going to suggest to you, our modern word does a very poor job of filling in what the Greek word there is for worship. If we use one of our modern words, actually, someone here give me a solid definition of worship. Raise your hand, an exact definition that would fit with what God's saying. Can you? To bow down to. Oh, that's an exact definition there. But what we're going to see very rarely is that used. So here, let's go to, because I think we should call Bible things by Bible names, right? The Bible only makes Christians only. Let's look at something. You ever use Bible Gateway? It's a great thing. You can search every different version of the Bible, Spanish, English, whatever you want, and you can see if something is there. So, worship service. I searched for that phrase. It says 0 Bible results for worship service. Sorry, we didn't find any results for your search. Please try the following. And it gives you suggestions. That's kind of weird, isn't it? I wonder why that is. Well, let's take another look. Let's look at something else. How about if we say for our corporate worship then? Maybe that's what God's talking about. 0 Bible results for corporate worship. Sorry, we didn't find any results for your search. Please try the following.
What if you just did worship and not add 2 words to it?
Oh, we are actually going to do that today, in fact. Okay. We're going to look at every single time it's used because that is usually the way you can prove something. Okay, so we're going to look at one other. The worship assembly. Sorry, we didn't find any results for your search. So, what we're going to see here is if God doesn't say that, what does He say? Now, the English, like I said before, I think it does a horrible job of describing worship. And I'm also going to throw out there, when we start going down this, the fear he immediately has is, oh no, Lucas is trying to say that this assembly doesn't matter, that we can do it any day of the week, that Sunday's not special, that we don't have to have any of this. That's not correct. That's an incorrect view, because in fact this will end up emphasizing our assembly, if we look at it correctly. So, when you ask people, you get confused answers. They can't point to a book, chapter, and verse of something that really defines worship, that we call it today at least. You can't point to any place that really says, well, look, that's the worship assembly that God's talking about. It's poorly defined. And if you study with Jewish people, and I've done this now 4 times and it's never worked, the first thing they go to is, in fact, I studied with one guy. He was a Jewish guy, but he went to a Church of Christ university. I said, why do you do that? And he says, because you guys know the Bible the best. And I thought, well, that's pretty awesome. And he really respected us for that. He said, of all of the Christian religions, you guys really deserve the most applause. And I thought, that's pretty cool. But you know what he said? The same thing that I encounter all the time. He goes, but you don't worship. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, do you see what I do? And he showed me the bowing down. He goes, you don't do that. You're not using the term correctly. I said, oh, that's kind of, that's a very Jewish perspective. So if these Jews were really reading this, that's what they would think. You don't worship correctly. And then, of course, he went with the standard Jewish line of, there aren't enough rules here to make a religion out of. There aren't enough rules in the New Testament, right? We don't have enough telling us what to do.
We've got all kinds of examples of the Jews not worshiping God properly.
Oh yeah. And you have examples like, look at Amos 5, when they were doing these festivals and stuff, and they were going up and bowing down, and they were rejected because guess what? Their heart was wrong. You get all the physical manifestations right. You could point to it like it's a checkbox, and then it's still not going to be correct. So, anyway, I went ahead and pulled from dictionary.com. I said, let's see what worship means to people in the modern day America. Well, it has 10 different definitions, and that's where I stopped because that would fit on the screen. Can you sense here that maybe there's some confusion? And usually where there's some confusion, there's something totally not concrete, it's just totally variable. A lot of times that's a point to Satan's trying to muddy the waters a little bit, because God has no variation or shifting shadow. So it says stuff like, it's a reverent honor and homage paid to God or a sacred personage or to any object regarded as sacred. Okay. Or it's just the object of adoring reverence or regard. Look down at 4. Or 9, and this is going to be totally weird, to attend services of divine worship. Wait, you can't use the word to define itself? That's crazy. This shows you that people don't even know how to explain this because it's so nebulous. There's nothing concrete. So when people ask you, well, show me the book, chapter, and verse on that, you're going to come up blank. Or if you do come up with something, I'm going to suggest to you, there's technically 3, but one's only used once. There are 2 options. One, you're going to be showing them to fall at the feet of someone. Or the second, you're going to show them something that has no definition. And they're not going to know what to think. Okay. So, the English word's etymology comes from Old English, worthsipe, worthiness, acknowledgement of worth. And if we take the etymology back further, because remember, worship is an actual word in the Bible. It's a word that later on translators, they saw this word they didn't quite know what to do with, and they said the modern English word worship maybe fits in with that best. That's what people will accept. So they threw it in there. Right? Like, have you ever seen Job? It seems to describe something like a dinosaur, a tail like a cedar and stuff. They didn't throw in dinosaur there. They didn't have that word. Okay.
That you don't bow down. That's right, because we don't have deity before us. An angel appears to you. You don't even bow down to them. So who are you going to bow down to?
Yes, he has noticed something very important. People, when they enter the presence of deity, bam, they're on the floor. That's what happens. And throughout the Old Testament, you will see that where do they go to worship, that is to bow down? Where do the people go? Now, I'm not saying the priests do this, because the priests don't. The priests are offering service. They're doing sacrifice and stuff. They can't have their face on the floor while they're offering service. Where do they usually go? They go to what? Temple. Why would that be? Why do they go to the temple? Why do they go places like that? That's where God is. So here's the question for you. If you have been immersed, right? And we're not just saying you've been dunked in a river and didn't understand what was happening at all, right? Because you just got your flesh clean. Do you wear Christ? Where is the presence then of deity? 24/7. Or where should it be?
He's in your heart.
Yeah, you should be wearing Christ. So should you be submitted, bowed down, worshiping in spirit? That's kind of what Jesus said, huh? He said, not the temple, not this mountain, in spirit. Okay, so what we're going to look at, though, is this etymology. I've compiled a bunch of it for you. You can see it comes from Old English word seep. I don't know how to say that. It just gets weirder and weirder. The condition of being worthy, dignity, glory, distinction, honor, renown, from weird, worthy, and sipe. And it says, sense of reverence paid to a supernatural or divine being is first recorded around the year 1300. This didn't exist back in biblical times. If you're a first century church, you would see this and say, that's not what that means. In fact, it wasn't until Catholicism got its dirty little hands on it and twisted it for a whole bunch of years that they started saying this is what this is, right? And you know what? You can go to certain Anglican churches and stuff and Catholic churches and they still bow down. They still physically do that. Have you ever been to them? It's kind of creepy. I've been to some where they make you actually stick out your tongue to put the wafer on it, because you're not allowed to touch it because it's holy, it's sacred. It's like, well, my tongue's touching it, but you're not a priest, so you can't. But I am a priest. God says so. A royal priesthood. So, what we're going to continue to look at here. Think about this. There are 5 authorized acts of worship. This is what I used to teach everyone. And now I've realized I couldn't really ever support that from the Bible. But singing, right? That's an act of worship. Wouldn't we all agree with that? It's an act of worship.
What you're singing.
Sing, I know, but that's
Monday.
well, yeah, that's true too. If you're singing AC/DC, maybe not. Highway to, yeah. That's a good point. No, Terry, I was hoisted by my own petard there. Thank you. But, see, we define these things as our worship service. And they say, well, why is it a worship service? Why is the Bible class not worship service? Because guess what? Basically across America, wherever you go, you get 15 to 35% of the people will show up for Bible class because that's not important to worship services. Wait, God never says there's a worship service. They never understood it like that. They searched the scriptures daily. The Bible class would be incredibly important to them. It's the word of life. So how do we introduce that divide? Well, Catholicism actually did that by changing our understanding of worship to be something that's incorrect. And if we want to go back to the Old Testament, because worship was a physical action, it was. And so it's natural for us to think that worship is still a physical action. What we'll actually see, if we actually went into this further, we're not going to today, is that service is a physical action. That is why it says to give our entire lives as a living and holy sacrifice, which is our rational service, which is different than the New Testament. In the New Testament, if you were one of the people, if you were not a Levitical priest, could you just go roaming around the temple and sacrificing animals and stuff and do it? No, you couldn't. Your position was on the floor. They have certain degrees of prostration they had to maintain. That was what you got to do. So this is a very radical position that Jesus took here when he said this. And of course, for us, we have so much tradition. Anyone remember OCDs? Remember them? Her and her husband, they interviewed here. They met down in Mexico on OCDs. Yeah, it was kind of funny because I was talking to her and she goes, she has a totally different background, right? She doesn't have any of this stuff, any of the traditions that you get in modern day Christianity. She goes, when someone first said worship service to me, I went and looked it up and I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. You can't actually make a concrete definition of what's going on and why that's more important than Bible class. I was like, oh yeah, well see, but if you don't have that cognitive dissonance because you don't have that the past history built up, it's a lot easier to understand. So let's see this. Let's see if you can actually worship with singing. Because people say that's what you got to do, right? It's one of the acts of worship we got to get right. Now, I'm going to say something else. God does say there are certain things He wants to do, and we're assembling, and He doesn't want us being crazy. He wants to do them decently in order, and He specifies, gives examples of ways that these were done decently and in order. So we still need to do those to show our love for Him, and also for us to grow. Because we're just going around crazy, and if you've ever been you've been somewhere where they're falling out in the Holy Spirit and even throwing up with the Holy Spirit, which is, whoa! There are places like that. My aunt and uncle got 300 people at once to roll on the ground while barking like dogs, claiming that they were speaking in tongues. That's crazy. That's crazy talk. It's definitely not the assembly mentioned in the New Testament. So,
Grandpa was some kind of preacher?
aunt and uncle, they ended up becoming Messianic Jews because there was more filthy lucre in that.
By the way, that's not on my side.
Not on her side. No. It's on the scam artist side, so don't worry about that. But here, so let's just recreate this. 2 Chronicles 29:28-29 gives us a very good example of this. It says, while the whole assembly worshipped. Okay, so the whole assembly is worshiping. The singers also sang, And the trumpet sounded, all this continued till the burnt offering was finished. Now at the completion of the burnt offerings, the king and all who were present with him bowed down and worshipped. So, let's just look at this again. While the whole assembly worshipped, that's full prostration. So when you're bowing down, by the way, the Jewish degrees of prostration, Qal, it's one of them, they have certain ways you do it, how you start this. It actually starts, I believe, at the head, and then it's bending the knee, and then you go all the way down until your forehead's on the ground. So, the assembly was worshiping.
That's Old Testament.
Oh, yes, it is. It is. But hey, Terry, when Jesus was speaking to this lady, what is she going to know? Is she going to know about the New Testament? How is she going to see this when she says, where do I go to worship? Right?
Well, because it changed. Because Jesus said, whenever two or more are gathered together in my name, I'm there with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it did change. It did change. But what is it? What's the definition here? Because you've got to put on, you can't have our perceptual filters. You have to be viewing it from the perspective of the culture at the time. So,
How would she have understood?
yeah, how would she have understood this? While the whole assembly worshiped, what was the assembly doing? Was worship singing to them? Was it trumpeting? No. Was it offering the burnt offering? No. There was one thing that you could do. And that was bowing down. And so when she asked, she's not a priest or anything, right? She's actually just a Samaritan. She says, where do I go to worship? Where do I go to bow down? She can't do any of this. She doesn't get to sing. She does not get to sing in the position of priesthood. She does not get to do that. That is not her job. She's not a Levitical priest. She's never going to have that job. She's just asking, where do I go to bow down? Where do I go to prostrate myself? And he says, in spirit. So, the biblical definitions, in case you think I'm lying, because this can seem like, oh, you're pulling a fast one on me. Let's just look at it. Let's pull it up. This is from the Old Testament word, shakah. It means worship. And it says, definition, to bow down. You can see all the ways it's used, and you can see the translators, based on how they're feeling about it, would translate it worship or bow down. Because it carried the context, by the way, when you bow down, of submission.
So
You were submitting to something.
go back to that last screen, please.
Stand by one.
Bow down and worship. So worship means more than just bowing down, even in the Old Testament.
It is,
All
well,
were present with him bow down and worship.
we're going to see there, if you actually look at the etymology and you click on the definitions, there are different words. You start off with a certain form of bowing.
Right.
And by the time you get to shakah, that is full-on submission, prostration. And I'll actually show you that too, because that is a good question. And when we do our New Testament readings, we're going to see that you'll see they bowed, or they fell at the feet of and worshipped. But the word there is used, bow down. And actually, we'll get to that real fast. Hang on. Very good question. So, proskuneo. Look at this. This is kind of a weird word. It carries the context of, or the meaning of, to kiss the hand towards one in token of reverence. So, if you're kissing your hand toward one, the literal meaning would be derived from to kiss like a dog licking his master's hand. Is your dog kind of in submission to you? Right? It's kind of showing a difference in rank. And in fact, it was understood among the Orientals, the Persians, to fall upon the knees and touch the ground with the forehead as an expression of profound reverence. Or, it says, in the New Testament, when this word is used, which will always be translated worship, by kneeling or prostration to do homage to one, to make obeisance, whether in order to express respect or to make supplication. So do you see that's a distinctly different thing than those 10 words that we're using? It doesn't really fit, because we're not really Jews. Now, we're spiritual Jews, right? You are the Jew. You're spiritual Israel. But we don't ever really get on the ground. We don't bow down. Just think to yourself really quickly, how many cultures show bowing as an act of submission? All the Muslims, big time, man. They got their prayer. In fact, you know what they call it when they take out their prayer rug? There are two things you can call it. They're synonymous with each other. The call to prayer and the call to worship. The call to bow down, though, because they bow down, they do this, and they make supplication to their God. The Jews did that as well. So, here are just some graven images I've taken off of Google search. And you can actually find them. This was Baal worship. This was a lithograph of Baal being worshipped. Now you notice that some people are worshiping, some people are trumpeting, and some people are offering a sacrifice. Distinctly different things, because this was a very physical thing. Israel is very physical, not so much spiritual. Okay, this is actually taken from Rabbi Jeff. his website. He's a rabbi. And he says the Aleinu is not just a prayer about adoring God. It is a prayer of submitting oneself to God in recognition of God's complete sovereignty over our lives and all of creation. The prayer's climatic moment, we declare, however you speak that. The phrase literally translated means, we bow and prostrate and give thanks before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed is He. And then he goes on to include this little graphic. In case you don't understand, these are the degrees of prostration you need to go before you can be shakah, or before you can be proskuneo, that is totally bowed down. So, right, they bow down and worship. They bow down, you can see here, they bow down, and they fully prostrate. Degrees of prostration. This is the Jewish perspective on this. Does that make sense? It's totally abhorrent to probably 90% of what most Americans have been taught. Because we don't have that tradition. We come from a tradition of Catholicism started trying to take over Christianity, and Christianity remained kind of in the background, but it remained. Then the Reformation said, well, we'll kind of try to redo Catholicism a little bit, but they didn't really get rid of everything Catholicism. They didn't really go back. Then the Restoration said, let's go all the way back. But even with the Restoration movement, we haven't had all that many resources to research these things and to look at the differences that have happened over time, right? We haven't had the access to these different lithographs and stuff to understand it. So guess what? Temple Mount. What are they doing? They are worshiping. Do we do that? Do we have a bow down service? In a way, we do, because we are spiritually submitting. But if it's in spirit, then it's going to jive with Isaiah, which says, you can submit to me all the time. And then God says, hey, you need to assemble. He didn't call it a worship service because we're all priests now. It didn't carry that context. This was for edification. We took the Lord's Supper and stuff. This is what we're supposed to do, to build each other up. The equipping of the saints for the work of service is what he would say in the New Testament.
Where are they bound down?
Temple Mount.
Yeah, but don't they face a certain direction?
East.
East.
They go east toward Mecca.
It depends on if you're Jewish, of course, or...
So if you're on the west side of Mecca, you'd bow down to the east. But if you're on the east side of Mecca, you'd bow down to the west. So.
The temple is
They
behind
have
them
rules about
there.
that too.
Yeah, I don't know the Talmudic traditions.
Their worship is not in truth, so it doesn't do them any good either.
Yeah, as he points... In fact, you know what? Unless you were to look at their lineage, you go up and ask them, you know what that could be? That could be Muslims at the Mount. Because they try to do that too. They're still striving for that physical thing. It's kind of interesting to think about.
Look at your picture you got there. The temple is behind them.
I know, that's what I'm saying. So it's probably Muslims in that picture at the Temple Mount. They still try to go to the same place. See what I'm saying? Yeah, so this might be particularly offensive if you're a Jew and they're doing this.
Yeah, but
That was a good
back
catch.
to the east towards Mecca, you could be all over the place and have to bow a certain direction, knowing which way Mecca is.
Oh, in fact,
If you're
yeah.
north of Mecca, you'd bow down to the south.
Have you ever heard of United Arab Emirates Airlines? They're from Dubai. If you're on one of their flights, at certain times of the day, the call to worship will sound. They have a map showing you which way to get in the aisle and bow. It will show you as you're flying along. Like, no, you need to be pointing this way now.
Enough room for everybody to get in the aisle.
No, I don't think there are, but they carry a lot of non-Muslims too. So
When the captain co-pilot comes, they're bowing down. That's it.
yeah, with a captain and co-pilot. Did you get the autopilot, John? So this is by the way, this is an Israeli. This is Jehu bowing before Shalmaneser III, being forced to worship this person. And in fact, if you go through the Old Testament, which we're not going to today, you'll just see stuff like Abraham. It says bowed down, and the word they use is the exact word for worship, the people. So the weird thing is that he submitted himself in prostration to the people, and you would think, but you can worship and serve your God, right, and your God alone. And the thing that I think is being conveyed in that case is that just as we are to submit to our physical government, in the Lord at least, we can still submit to someone else and show that submission. But if they start telling you, go murder babies, you need to work at Planned Parenthood, then no. Then all bets are off. So, the worship is in spirit and the service is in life, because he says, therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your rational service. It's Romans 12:1. A lot of people didn't know what to do with that. And so you will see, actually, as time went on, the King James and like the Young's Literal, these literal translations will say, they'll call it your intelligent service or your rational service. Later on, when you get to the New American Standard, which is still my favorite version, they say your spiritual service of worship. Well, what does that mean? What he's actually just saying is it's rational for you to offer your entire life to me, to service to me. That's what he's really trying to convey there. And you can't do that. You cannot offer your entire life if you're not trying to keep your spirit in submission to him at all times. Right? Because then you have an inconsistent life. Then when you go out the doors, you're a totally different person. There is, of course, the example of someone in this audience who, in her younger years, was at a bar and some guy told her, "Well, you need to go to church tomorrow." And she said, "Well, that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. So you're here getting wasted tonight, and then you think that tomorrow that's better for you? It's not. It's an inconsistent life." But like I said, this is all well and good. And before we have gone over the Old Testament stuff, which is also well and good, but what will really help you in your own study is to go and look at every single time where the word worship actually occurs in the New Testament. Because I can say anything. As Kevin always likes to tell us, I can convince you that with the Lord's Supper you have to have green jello. There are ways that you can be hoodwinked, which is not good. So your own review of this is important. So I just did some of this. Why isn't it up there? I guess I got to go like this. Yeah, it's a different way this time. So I just did a little study and looked at every place that it was actually used. So we already read John 4, but how about Matthew 2, 8, and 11? So it says now, starting Matthew 2, starting verse 1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born, King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Okay, let's keep going. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Gathering together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah. For out of..." Click down. I didn't put this into PowerPoint, it's too long. "You shall come forth from a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod secretly called the Magi and determined from them the exact time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and when you have found him, report to me so that I too may come and worship him." After hearing the king, they went their way, and the star, which they had seen in the east, went on before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceeding with great joy. After coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So, we see worship being used, and we could say, well, hey, the people that made Vine's Expository Dictionary, Brown, Driver, Briggs, all these different people, and all the lithographs show us that worship is bowing down. But maybe that's not good enough. Maybe we should still consider or continue our research to solidify this in our own minds. And so, you see worship, and then worship. And you see it in action. What did they do with this worship? What did they do? They fell to the ground and worshipped him. Now, did they fall to the ground and do 5 different things? Did they fall to the ground, pray, sing, take communion? No, they didn't. That wasn't what it meant to them. They fell to the ground and they bowed down with their foreheads in prostration and submission. That's what's being conveyed there.
And then they follow the directions of whoever they're bowing down before and tells them. They just kind of wait to see what he says to do,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
They bow down, and they go, "No, get up, don't worship me." But they bow down, and he sends them off to do whatever.
Yeah, exactly, right? No, you're submitting to the wrong person. What are you doing? The wrong being. Yeah.
Just bow down and wait for them to tell you what to do, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah.
In a way, in our spirit, that is true. We are bowed down.
Yeah, if your spirit is bowed down, right? I have a question for you. So if your spirit is bowed down to God, if you are worshiping him in your spirit, are you going to assemble correctly? Are you going to do the things at assembly that he wants you to do? Yeah, you will. Now, are you going to incorporate Jewish things? Do you have to? Do you have to bow down? No. Do you have to lift holy hands? No, you don't have to do those things. There are certain things, though, that he tells us, you're going to do this. Yeah, they are commanded. The Lord's Supper, by the way, man, you're reading Corinthians, that was important. But what he calls it in Corinthians, he actually tells me, he says, so when you assemble. That's all he called it. He didn't say when you assemble to worship, because then they would say, when we assemble to bow down, they go right back to being Jews again. He just said, when you assemble, and he talks about the Lord's Supper. As you can see, there are a remaining 30 pages that you can research on your own, and we might do it together, just to read every single time God says worship in the New Testament. And we can also do it in the Old, although as Terry pointed out, I don't like to do that too much. It does lead you to Christ, but then it doesn't really show you the New Testament example for us to do. And we don't want to become Jews. We just kind of want to have the understanding of what they would have rebelled against in this notion of worshiping in spirit. So that's all we're going to do for now. I appreciate your attention. I know this is probably cognitively dissonant. It's really weird to hear. You're going to think, so everything we do is worship, and that's not what I'm saying at all, because anytime you're sinning, you're not in submission to God. So no, not everything you do is worship. But should we be in submission and bow down in spirit all the time? Yes. And that will lead us to living an entire life as a living and holy sacrifice.